pornography in that monograph of ours is that we might be wasting our time talking about censorship, sexual depiction, what to do with it, when the real issue at hand is helping people have a different set of standards in terms of sexuality, what viewing sexuality means, what are the standards by which we judge things that make us happy, desirous, erotic. And maybe it's that is the bigger issue for feminists, not the portrayal, but what are the sexual ethics behind the things we do? What are the reasons our tastes are cultured and developed this way? And so we thought, while we don't want censorship, we also will never ever condemn anyone who comes up and says that's an awful portrayal and it should not have been shown, and these things are also acceptable. In fact, it's our duty to look at a particular sexual portrayal and say, I'm going to join a rally against a restaurant that put this kind of a poster on their wall. So these are that was, for example, one of the things we did, and I think that's also very important. We also took into consideration that when there were experiments, I believe in the US, on community censorship that really looked at standards, a lot of lesbian film and art got censored out, even on the basis of community standards. So we thought, never mind the censorship part. There is a question whether gender studies is women's studies, or how they influenced each other, if somebody gave birth to something. Coming from the perspective, at least, of what I know is the earlier movement, which is women's studies, there are several kinds of feminist theories, some of which would never have given birth to gender studies. Because my understanding of gender, as I said as we started it, is understanding first that it's a social construction. So some feminist theories that did accept that sex is a given and it's gender that can be changed, I don't think we're very productive in understanding that sex is not a given, and both biology and society are tied up in the concept of gender. Those feminist theories that did indeed grasp this, those feminist theories that never just viewed oppression as the oppression of women by men, but understood that there are multiple sites of oppression and control, race, class, disability, ethnicity, many other things. Given a particular moment, there will always be power situations that people find themselves in. Those have been very useful in giving birth to a broad range of other theoretical positionings, including gender studies. That has contributed very much to it, including post-colonial studies as well. So the question of who gave birth to whom, if you talk about collaborative networks of people working completely on their own and then coming out to find that somebody else working completely on their own was doing something very similar, or people who have always said, you know, I got that idea from someone else who got, and I know she got it from someone else, and actually we talked. This whole beehive, a network of creative thinking and theory. I don't know who gave birth to who, but definitely you can see interconnections theoretically and practically in a lot of gender and women's studies work. It's important to do two things. First, to understand that there are very distinct academic theoretical disciplines. There's a basis for that. Very distinct struggles and resistances, both in terms of gender, LGBTI struggles, and feminist struggles, that one should not think in a binary way when viewing both the theories and the struggles. But the other side of the coin also, that while they are distinct, there is really, in my mind, a strategic reason that they should be together. And then I will return to why sexuality the concept of sexuality, desire, reproductive work, and the reproductive economy is important to me, because that's where they will come together, and that's the big arena of struggle where all these particular movements must join together if we're going to overhaul the way we desire. The question of gender mainstreaming, for example, is very controversial for the women's movement. In general, I think, and especially in the Philippines, and we're quite known for being great gender mainstreamers and using governments and the bureaucracy to work things out. I will answer it in two ways, what I think and also how we will handle the differences. And they're both extremely important content issues. The first one is I accept the critiques. We live here. We live here. We know that there are good practices and a whole lot of bad practices. When there are good practices, it's wonderful and we all feel really good. When there are bad practices, we know that ballroom dancing enters into the gender budget and is considered a women's activity. So we also know that as long as you don't question the mainstream, then we'll become equal in a really bad mainstream. So this is not a nice thing to happen. And we also know that that part of the world that gender mainstreaming reaches does not reach other aspects of women's lives and realities. I frankly think that no amount of gender mainstreaming in government, in institutions, etc., will change the sexual division of labor, which is at the basis of a lot of our problems as individuals and as a society. I think the push that will end that will come from somewhere else, not from the efforts at gender mainstreaming. Having said that, the question arises, and this is, I think, important for those of us who are activists when we're talking about organization. How do we, as a movement, or movements of the left, or broadly cut, how does the transformative movement view differences? And I think one also of the insights of postmodern politics is the understanding that differences are not a political problem. Even if the content is entirely, even if in words we're saying exactly opposite things, perhaps it's not going to be a political liability. In fact, the call of unity has been used over and over and over again against activists, organizations, and transformative movements to put us down and to make us squabble against each other. If we understand a new view of power, that the power is hegemonic, that it works at both structural levels and the very intimate levels, that there are power dynamics that are good across time and power dynamics that occur only at the moment when we're sitting at the table against the World Bank official whom we want to kick in wherever. If we understand these things, then we also then begin to see that we can have a new ethics of politics that takes strength from from the differences. And let me then move from the very theoretical to the concrete. The concrete is, the last time I was in Congress, lower house, the bigger house, because of the reproductive health bill that we're trying to get passed. And we had another really frustrating day because of the obfuscation, shenanigans, obstructionism of the allies of the church in the House. We went out of the session hall after the session ended, essentially having spent the day there accomplishing very little. And the groups I was with started chanting, you know, just to let the steam off and a way of saying goodbye, the usual. And the chanting was such that you could dance to it. So who would come out to dance to it? Two groups that don't give birth. Very elderly women who had come with us in their complete Filipiniana costumes, looking very conservative and traditional, started dancing with what we would call our typical gay parlor personnel, right? What we call in Filipino parloristas. And they started dancing, and the way they were dancing was that the elderly ones were dancing in sort of a coracha style, and the parloristas were in complete DI mode, you know. And it was amazing to me. I said, if you want to know what queer politics is about, you know, coalitions of people coming together for a particular issue. And this, we never move, my organization never moves without explaining. We don't bus people to Congress who don't know what's going on. They're there because they know what they're fighting for, and they come on their own free will. So you see people fighting for an issue. Perhaps it's not their main issue. Perhaps it is. Perhaps they're learning something from it. But you also see this great politics. And so you can see people can come together for a particular issue, for moments of unity, even if they may have very broad differences later. The other thing is, when the Catholic Church was calling for a big prayer rally during the time of our EDSA II revolution against President Estrada, who was unseated because of charges of massive corruption, and the church was putting on its seemingly progressive face by calling for a big rally against this corruption. There were, in a meeting of huge political parties and groups, there were two organizations that said, we're not going. Anything that the church calls, we're not going, because we want to hold the church accountable for its extremely reactionary position. Not just on women, but as I'm explaining, if you're reactionary against the reproductive economy, you're also reactionary against class struggles. So if you're reactionary in the area of sexuality, then you are stroking capitalism with one hand while pretending to slap it with the other. That's what we feel, and that's what we said. That was Likhaan, which I think is a medium-sized NGO at best. And the lesbian advocates of the Philippines, who at that time I think were an office of 2 and a membership of 15. But that was very interesting, because we were sitting with huge groups who suddenly thought, And I understand that a lot of people heard of the issue for the first time. A lot of people began to understand, oh, it's not as simple as it seems to be. And a lot of feminist groups said, we absolutely respect the position of these women. You should listen to them, but we're going. And when they went, we said, we absolutely respect the position of these women, because we understand they are going for these reasons and not those reasons. And I think that kind of a handling of politics, where, to speak in postmodern terms, you don't reify identities to the point that they cause divisions, extremely important. And so when we talk of postmodernism, and when we talk about what feminist theories and struggles also bring to the table in terms of tools of political analysis and strategic thinking, and then deciding programs and actual actions, I think we're going to have to talk about the new kind of ethics that these new tools of analysis are giving us. If we have a new view of power, if we have a new view of resistance, if we have a new view of the architecture of the world, which is still capitalist and patriarchal and racist, but it's a different architecture, then we also need to talk about a new kind of political ethics. The University of the Philippines Center for Women's Studies was established 20 years ago, and it's an office that has a system-wide function. In other words, it has a function that works with the campus, all the campuses of the University of the Philippines nationwide. And the objectives of the center are to create and sharpen awareness of women and gender issues in the university, as well as society at large, to encourage and strengthen teaching, research, extension, and advocacy programs on and for women, to strengthen and vitalize multi- and interdisciplinary programs in women's studies, to initiate the integration of gender concepts in the academic curricula, to promote incentives for the recognition of women's achievements and contribution to national development and gender consciousness, and to provide an organizational umbrella within UP for university-wide activities in women and gender studies. So we are very proud of our center, of course, because we are given the power to do several things, to go deeply into gender and women's studies, to make sure that they stay within the university's theoretical domain and field of activity and work, but also because we are allowed to do something that the University of the Philippines is also very proud of, which is to be accountable to the Filipino people by advocating from within the university to society, and by taking what women in society want and